I stayed home because someone had to. My parents were leaving for a funeral out of state, and the timing lined up with a heavy snowstorm that made travel slow and uncertain. My sister chose to stay with friends. I volunteered without much thought. I was 19 and wanted the house to myself. I pictured quiet nights, food I didn't have to share, and no one checking where I was or what time I came back. The house sat near the end of a short street that looped back on itself. Most of the neighbors were older. In winter, the place felt abandoned. Snow covered the sidewalks and pressed Saond flat. Even during the day, everything felt muffled. Night, it was worse. No cars passed. No dogs barked. The silence stayed solid and close, like the walls had moved in. The first night felt normal. I stayed up late watching videos and eating leftovers. The heat clicked on and off. Pipes ticked in the walls. Snow brushed against the windows. I slept in my room with the door open and the hall light off. The second day passed slowly. I shoveled the driveway and didn't leave the house again. By evening, fresh snow had already covered my tracks. The street looked untouched. I remember noticing how clean it looked, like no one lived there at all. That night, I noticed the first light when I went to the kitchen for water. The small bathroom near the back door glowed softly. I hadn't used it. I stood still and stared at it longer than I should have. I told myself I had forgotten. I turned it off and went back to my room. Later, when I passed the stairs, I saw the basement light shining up through the gap under the door. That stopped me completely. I never went into the basement. It was unfinished, cold, and cluttered with old furniture and boxes. The light switch sat at the bottom of the stairs. Couldn't be turned on from upstairs. I didn't go down. I didn't open the door. I turned on every light on the main floor instead. I locked my bedroom door and stayed awake longer than planned. When I finally slept, it was shallow and tense. The house felt different after that. Not louder, quieter. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. Every sound seemed placed there on purpose. When the heat kicked on, I listened for footsteps under it. When the fridge hummed, I strained to hear anything behind it. Around 3 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen lit the room in pale blue. A notification from the security camera app sat at the top. Motion detected. Interior hallway. My parents had installed cameras a year earlier. One faced the front door. One pointed down the main hallway toward the bedrooms. I rarely checked them. I opened the alert without sitting up. The clip loaded slowly. The hallway appeared exactly as I had left it. Dim. Still. Then something crossed the frame. It wasn't fast. It didn't blur. It moved at a steady pace, tall enough that its shoulders nearly brushed the top of the frame. The shape blocked the camera for just over a second. No face showed. No clear features. Just height, bulk, and motion. I watched it again. Then again. The movement was too smooth for a glitch. The camera timestamp stayed steady. The shape cast a shadow along the wall that matched the hallway light. Whatever it was, it occupied space. I locked my phone and sat up. I listened. Nothing moved. The house stayed silent. I didn't check the app again. I didn't open my door. I stayed in my room until morning, sitting on my bed with my shoes on and my keys in my pocket. When daylight came, I walked the house carefully. The basement light was off. The bathroom light was off. All doors were locked. No windows were open. No snow around the house showed signs of disturbance. Everything looked untouched. I tried to convince myself I was tired, that the shape was my own reflection, that the lights were mistakes. I kept the house bright all day. I didn't let any room stay dark. That night, snow started falling again. Thick flakes dropped straight down, killing what little sound existed. The street vanished under white. The world shrank to the walls of the house. I stayed in the living room with every lamp on. I didn't sit. I didn't relax. Around midnight, the basement light turned on again. This time, I saw it happen. The glow slid out from under the door slowly, like someone had taken their time flipping the switch. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. I stood there, staring, waiting for the door to open. Didn't. 3:02 a.m., The phone vibrated again. Motion detected. Interior hallway. I opened the clip with shaking hands. The hallway looked darker this time. Then the same tall shape passed through, slower than before, close enough that the camera adjusted exposure. I could see fabric texture, a long coat, a hood or hat. The shape filled the frame from floor to ceiling. I noticed something new on the third viewing. The direction. It moved toward my bedroom. I didn't stay inside after that. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my jacket. I didn't turn off lights. I didn't lock the door behind me. I went straight to my car and started the engine. The heater roared to life. I locked the doors and leaned my seat back. I stayed there until morning. When my parents came back early, they found me asleep in the driver's seat with the engine running and frost on the windows. The house behind me glowed with every light still on. What followed explained everything in a way that fit too cleanly to ignore. A contractor who had worked on a neighboring house months earlier had kept a copied basement key. Our basement door could be unlocked from outside. He had been using the space at night to sleep during the cold. He knew the house was empty. He moved when he thought no one was home. He avoided cameras when he could. He wore heavy winter clothing that made him look larger on video. He used lights carefully and shut them off before morning. The snow hid his tracks. The silence hid his movement. The camera caught him only when he misjudged timing. The house had never been empty. I just hadn't known I was sharing it. After that, the locks were changed. The cameras were repositioned. The basement was sealed. I never stayed home alone there again. I rented the house because it was cheap and close to my new job. That was the full reason. I was 26, recently divorced, and tired in a way sleep did not fix. I wanted a place where nothing asked anything from me. The house sat alone at the end of Old Cory Road, a narrow stretch of cracked pavement that stopped before the woods. Behind the property were thick trees and an abandoned stone pit that dropped away into shadow. The landlord said the place had been empty for a while. I did not ask why. Silence felt like a benefit, not a warning. The house was older but solid. 2 floors, gray siding, a small porch, and a yard that had not been cut in months. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. The floors creaked in spots, but they were level. The windows locked. The doors were heavy and fit their frames. I walked through each room the first night and felt calm. No strange marks, no damage, just a place that had been waiting. The first week alone went fine. I worked during the day, came home, cooked simple meals, and slept early. I left the porch light off because the darkness outside felt clean. At night, the woods pressed close, but nothing moved. The house made its normal sounds. Pipes cooled, wood shifted, wind touched the siding. I learned the patterns and stopped noticing them. The second week was when small things started to stand out. One evening I came home and saw mud on the kitchen floor. It was not a lot, just a few smears near the sink, darker than the rest of the wood. I stood there and looked at my shoes. They were clean. I had not gone around back. I wiped the floor and told myself it had been there already and I had missed it. The house had been empty. Dirt made sense. A few nights later, I went to lock the back door before bed. The deadbolt was turned just enough to look unlocked. Not wide open, just off by a fraction. I knew I locked it every night. I always checked. I turned it back and stood there longer than usual, listening. Nothing followed. I slept anyway. Then the porch light started coming on by itself. I would notice it through the living room window while watching television. It would glow for a minute, then go dark. The switch inside stayed down. I tested it more than once. I flipped it on and off, watched the light respond, and left it off again. Still, every few nights it would come on and shut itself off. I blamed wiring. The house was old. Old houses did things like that. The pattern continued. Mud reappeared, always near the back of the house. The deadbolt shifted again. The porch light flicked on at night. None of it happened every day. That made it easier to ignore. If it had been constant, I would have acted sooner. Instead, I adjusted, cleaned more. I checked locks twice. I told myself I was tired. I started keeping the bedroom door closed at night. Not because I was scared. It just felt better. The room was on the first floor, at the back of the house, with one window facing the woods. I kept the blinds down. The bed sat against the interior wall. My phone stayed on the nightstand. I slept lighter than before. One night, I woke up and checked the time without thinking. The screen said 2:14 a.m. I remember that because the numbers stuck with me. I lay still, listening. At first, I thought the sound was coming from outside. Then I realized it was inside the house. Footsteps moved along the length of the building. Slow, heavy, not rushed. They were not trying to be quiet, but they were careful. Each step landed flat, heel to toe, like someone walking through a familiar space in the dark. They passed the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Then they stopped. They stopped directly outside my bedroom wall. I did not move. I did not reach for my phone. I focused on breathing without noise. The wall felt thinner than it ever had. I could hear the weight of a person shifting. A faint scrape, like a shoe adjusting on wood. The sound stayed there, close, patient. It did not press against the door. It did not test the handle. It just waited. Nothing else happened. After a long time, the footsteps moved away, toward the back of the house. I heard the soft thud of the back door closing. Then silence. I did not sleep again that night. At sunrise, I forced myself outside. I needed to see something solid. The yard was wet with dew. The woods were still. Near the back steps, I saw the footprints. Bare feet, clear impressions in the soft dirt, toes spread slightly, heels deep. They came straight from the trees to the steps. They stopped there. There were no prints leading away. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to understand what I was seeing. The dirt beyond the steps was undisturbed. No tracks back into the woods. No signs of a struggle. Just a path that ended at my door. I called the landlord that morning and asked about the house. I did not accuse. I kept my voice even. He admitted the place had been used by someone before. A man who had lived there years earlier, off the grid, without permission. He knew the quarry. He knew the woods. When the house was empty, the man used it. Slept inside during bad weather. Came and went through the back door. He left things behind. Mud, marks. The landlord had changed the locks. But the man had a habit of returning to places he knew. The landlord said he thought the problem had ended. I asked why no one told me. He said it had been quiet for months. That afternoon, I went through the house again. Slower this time. I checked the crawl space, the attic, behind the shed. In the pantry, behind the lower shelves, I found scuffed marks on the wall where someone had leaned. In the laundry room, I found a blanket stuffed behind the water heater, damp and sour. In the abandoned stone pit behind the trees, I found a small fire ring and food wrappers, recent enough to still smell. The pieces fit together in a way I did not like. The man was not breaking in. He was returning. He knew the layout. He knew the sounds. He waited until I slept. He came inside because he believed the house was still his or close enough. The footprints ended at the steps because he never left that way. He had already been inside. I packed that night. I did not rush, but I did not linger. I left the porch light on. I locked the doors and windows and drove away before dark. I stayed with a coworker until I found another place. A week later, the landlord called to say the man had been caught sleeping in the quarry, using the house for shelter when the weather turned. He had been doing it for years, drifting, watching, waiting for the place to empty again. The locks meant nothing to him. The routine mattered more. I never went back to old Cory Road. I think about the sound of those footsteps sometimes, the way they stopped outside my wall, not searching, not confused, just present, knowing exactly where I was. Summer 2014 sits clear in my memory because of how still the days felt and how long the nights became. My aunt asked me to stay at her place for a week while she traveled overseas. She needed someone to keep an eye on the house, collect mail, water a few plants. I agreed without thinking much about it. The pay was easy, and I wanted distance from my roommates. Their noise, their habits, their mess had been grinding on me for months. Her house was older and narrow, built long before open layouts became common. It stood alone, surrounded by trees that had grown too close over the years. The driveway curved out of sight before it reached the road. No nearby houses were visible from the windows. At night, there were no porch lights in the distance, no moving headlights, nothing to measure time by. Just darkness and the sound of insects. Inside, the house felt tight. The walls were close. The ceilings were low. Every room had a door, and most of them didn't sit right in their frames. Some stayed open unless forced shut. Others clicked softly when the air pressure changed. The stairs to the second floor were steep and narrow, boxed in by walls on both sides. The attic access was a folding ladder set into the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, the kind that drops down when pulled. Before leaving, my aunt warned me that the place made noises at night. She said the house had always done that. Old wood, temperature changes, settling. She said it casually, like it was an annoyance she'd lived with for years. I didn't ask questions. I didn't think I needed to. I stayed on the first floor. I set up in the small living room with my laptop, a fan, and a thin mattress on the floor. I avoided the second floor because it felt unused, like space that had been abandoned without reason. The upstairs rooms held old furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked against walls, and a faint smell of dust and insulation. I went up there once on the first day and didn't feel the need to go again. The first night passed without anything strange. The house cooled slowly after sunset. The fan pushed warm air around. Insects clicked outside the windows. I slept lightly but uninterrupted. The second night, around the same time I usually shut my laptop and turned off the light, I noticed movement above me. It was close to 11:30 p.m. The sound came from the ceiling directly over the living room. It wasn't a creak or a pop. It was a slow shift, like weight being adjusted. Something pressed down, then released, then pressed again a few feet away. I lay still and waited. I told myself it was wood expanding or cooling. I told myself it was nothing. The sound happened again, measured and controlled, as if someone were taking careful steps without lifting their feet. It stopped after a few minutes. I slept poorly but managed to rest. The third night, it happened again at almost the same time. The pattern repeated. Slow pressure, pause, another shift. It moved from one side of the ceiling to the other, then stopped. I counted my breaths. I stared at the dark. I kept the fan on to cover the sound. During the day, the house felt normal. Sunlight filled the rooms. Dust floated in the air. Nothing seemed out of place. All doors were where I had left them. The stairs were untouched. The attic ladder stayed flush with the ceiling. By the fourth evening, the quiet began to feel staged, like the house was waiting for something. I kept myself busy to avoid thinking about it. I cleaned the kitchen. I organized mail. I watched videos until my eyes hurt. Before going to sleep, I walked the house out of habit. I checked locks. I checked windows. When I reached the hallway near the stairs, I noticed the attic ladder. It hung halfway down, not fully extended, not broken loose, just lowered enough to be obvious. I stood there longer than I should have. The ladder swayed slightly from the air moving through the hallway. I hadn't been upstairs since the first day. I knew I hadn't touched it. The release latch required a deliberate pull. Gravity alone wouldn't do that. I didn't climb it. I didn't reach for it. I pushed it back up using a broom handle until it clicked into place. My hands shook after. I dragged a chair from the dining room and wedged it under the hallway door that led to the stairs. The chair scraped loudly across the floor, and the sound echoed through the house. That night, I didn't turn off the light. I lay on the mattress and stared at the ceiling. Around 11:30 p.m., the sound returned. It was heavier this time. The movement was slower, more deliberate. The ceiling bowed slightly with each shift. I could track the weight as it moved from one end of the room to the other. Dust drifted down in thin lines from a seam in the plaster. The sound didn't stop after a few minutes. Continued. A steady crawl, pause, reposition. Over and over. I stayed frozen. I focused on breathing quietly. I didn't check the time again. I didn't move. Every part of me waited for the sound of the chair tipping over, the hallway door opening, footsteps on the stairs. None came. The movement stayed above me until the sky lightened. It slowed as morning approached, then stopped completely. I didn't sleep. When daylight filled the house, I walked upstairs with every light on. The chair was still pressed against the door. The attic ladder was flush with the ceiling. Nothing looked disturbed. I waited until midday before pulling the ladder down. The attic smelled stale. Insulation lay uneven, disturbed in long paths. There were flattened sections where weight had been placed repeatedly. Near the far end, I found a nest of old blankets, a backpack, empty food containers, and a battery-powered lantern. A small opening in the roof insulation led toward a vent that faced the back of the house, hidden by trees. Someone had been living there, carefully, quietly, for long enough to know my schedule. I didn't stay another night. I left the house that afternoon with what I'd brought and locked the door behind me. Later, the situation was handled. The attic was cleared. The access points were sealed. The house was inspected and reinforced. No one was found inside by the time it was checked. The explanation fit every detail. The timing, the careful movements, the ladder pulled halfway down, testing access. The weight above my ceiling until sunrise, waiting for silence, waiting for sleep. The house didn't make noises. It had never been empty. In 2012, being alone at night felt normal to me. My parents worked night shifts, sometimes together, sometimes alternating, but most weeks the house was mine from sunset until early morning. I was 16 and thought I understood the sounds of an empty place. I knew how pipes knocked when the heat kicked on. I knew the tick of cooling metal, the soft hum of electricity moving through walls. I believed I could tell the difference between harmless noise and something wrong. The town was small and quiet, the kind of place where streets emptied early and porch lights shut off one by one. Our house sat back from the road, shielded by a few trees that blocked the view from passing cars. At night, the dark settled thick around it. The only light came from inside, and even that felt swallowed once it hit the windows. That evening started like every other. I ate alone, rinsed my plate, and went to my room. I watched videos on my phone until the battery dipped low. Around 10:30, I decided to shower before bed. My parents wouldn't be back until after 6. I locked the front door out of habit and turned on the bathroom light. The bathroom sat at the end of a short hallway. My bedroom was the last door on the left. I remember glancing into it before stepping into the shower. My bed was neat enough, blanket pulled halfway up, pillow pressed flat where I had been sitting earlier. The window above the bed was shut, as it always was. The screen was torn and bent, and bugs came through if it stayed open. I never touched it. The water took a moment to warm. Steam filled the small room fast. The sound of the spray drowned out everything else. I stood under it, eyes closed, letting the heat hit my shoulders. That was when I heard it. A dull shift, followed by a long creak, came from my bedroom. The sound was unmistakable. The mattress sank the way it did when someone sat down near the edge. Springs complained under sudden weight. The bed frame gave a soft knock against the wall. I froze. Water ran down my face and back, but I barely felt it. My heart started pounding so hard it made my ears ring. I held my breath without meaning to, listening for the sound to happen again. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no movement, just the shower and the distant hum of the house. I shut the water off slowly. The silence rushed in. Every small sound felt sharp. The drip from the shower head echoed. My breathing sounded loud and uneven. I stayed there longer than I should have, wrapped in a towel, staring at the door. I expected the handle to turn. I expected pressure against the frame. Nothing happened. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the air felt colder than it should have. The bathroom light cast a weak glow ahead of me. My bedroom door stood open. The bed looked wrong immediately. The blanket was pulled back on one side, folded inward the way it did when someone stood up too fast. The pillow leaned at an angle, creased down the center. The mattress still held a shallow dip near the edge. I stood in the doorway, unable to move closer. My eyes went straight to the window. It was open a few inches. The curtain shifted slightly from the air coming through. I knew I hadn't opened it. I knew I never did. I crossed the room slowly, checking corners, the closet, behind the door. Nothing was there. I shut the window and locked it, then pushed the dresser against the wall beneath it. My hands shook so badly I had to stop and press them together. I slept on the couch that night with every light on. The next morning, daylight made the house look ordinary again. The fear felt thin, like something I had exaggerated in the dark. I went back to my room to clean up the mess I'd made. That was when I noticed the marks. On the outside of the window frame, deep scratches cut into the wood. 3 long grooves ran parallel, uneven and rough. They weren't fresh enough to bleed sap, but they were sharp and clear. They sat just below where the window would have been pried. I stared at them for a long time. My stomach twisted in a way that didn't fade. Later, everything unraveled into something that made sense, though it didn't bring comfort. A man had been arrested 2 streets over that same week. He had been breaking into houses at night, targeting ones where he thought teenagers were alone. He climbed instead of forcing doors. He tested windows quietly. He sat on beds to listen for movement before committing to anything further. The scratches matched the tool he carried, something narrow and metal he used to wedge frames open without shattering glass. He had watched routines. He knew when lights went off. He knew when showers ran. My parents' work schedule had been visible for anyone paying attention. Their car left at the same time each night. Mine stayed. The window screen hadn't kept him out. It had only slowed him. He hadn't finished opening it when the water shut off. He had moved fast, leaving the bed as it was when he stood. The sound I heard wasn't my imagination. It was someone deciding whether to stay or go. After that, my parents changed shifts. The locks were replaced. Bars went on the windows. I never showered with the bathroom door closed again while I lived there. Even now, years later, I can still hear that mattress creak when the house goes quiet. I worked nights, so my days were for sleep. That routine shaped everything. I came home as the sun rose, ate something simple, locked the door, pulled the blinds, and shut down. The apartment stayed dim even at noon. The building was a tall concrete slab with glass balconies stacked like drawers. It felt safe in the way numbers feel safe. Key fobs, cameras, a desk in the lobby, elevators that logged every stop. I lived alone on the 17th floor and never worried about it. I slept hard during the day. My body learned the hours. I rarely woke before late afternoon. That was why I didn't notice someone watching me. The afternoon it happened, I drifted up from sleep slowly. My head felt thick. The room smelled like stale air and fabric softener. I lay still for a moment, eyes closed, listening to the usual hum of the building. Distant traffic. A pipe clicking somewhere in the walls. Then I heard breathing. It wasn't mine. It was close enough that I could hear moisture in it. The slight hitch between breaths. The sound a nose makes when it pulls air through. I held still and counted my own breaths, trying to sync them, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The sound didn't match. It stayed steady when I paused. My eyes opened. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. The breathing came from the side of the bed, low, almost level with my ear. I felt the mattress give a little, like weight shifting near my legs. My skin prickled. I reached for the lamp and flipped it on. The light flooded the room. Nothing was there. No shape, no shadow. The door was closed. The closet doors were shut. The air felt empty, flat. The sound stopped at once, like it had been switched off. I sat up, heart beating hard enough to shake my chest, and scanned every corner. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, behind the bathroom door. I opened the front door and looked down the hallway. No one. The locks were still thrown. The chain hung slack. The place looked untouched. I blamed sleep. My hours were wrong. I'd worked a long stretch. I shut the lamp off and sat on the edge of the bed until my pulse slowed. I didn't lie back down. I showered, dressed, and left early for my shift, unsettled but not convinced. I worked through the night on autopilot. Images replayed without sound. The thought that someone had been close enough for me to hear them breathe kept pressing back in. When I got home in the morning, I checked the apartment again before sleeping. Everything seemed normal. I locked the door and went to bed. The next afternoon, I woke up with the same sense of being watched. No sound this time, just pressure like eyes on my face. I stayed still for a long time, listening. Nothing moved. I sat up and looked around. The lamp stayed off. The room stayed dark. I told myself I was spiraling and forced myself to get up. That evening, before leaving, I opened the app for my door camera. I hadn't checked it in weeks. The feed loaded slowly. I scrolled back to the previous day, looking for deliveries or nothing at all. At 11:09 a.m., the timestamp showed motion. The video showed my door from the hallway angle. The hall lights cast a pale wash on the carpet. At first, nothing happened. Then the door unlocked. Not forced. The handle turned the way it always did when I came home. The door opened just enough to let someone slip inside. The person wore a dark cap pulled low and a hoodie zipped to the chin. Their face stayed angled down. They moved with care, easing the door closed behind them until the latch clicked. The timestamp kept running. There was no more motion. The feed stayed still for hours. I scrolled forward. At 6:47 p.m., the door opened again. I watched myself come home, tired, keys in hand. I watched the door swing inward. For a split second, there was movement behind it, a blur retreating deeper into the apartment, out of the camera's view. Then I stepped inside and shut the door. I felt sick. I watched it again and again until the details stuck. The person had entered in full daylight. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't taken anything that triggered the camera inside. They had stayed while I slept. They had stayed while I showered. They had stayed while I left for work. I went through the apartment with a different eye. Small things stood out. The chair in the bedroom wasn't where I left it. The shower curtain hung a little differently. The bathroom fan had been on when I got home one morning, though I was sure I'd turned it off. I'd noticed these things before and brushed them aside. I didn't sleep that day. I sat in the living room with the lights on, watching the door, replaying the footage. I checked the building app for maintenance notices. There were none. I checked the access logs I could see as a resident. My door showed one entry at 11:09 a.m., logged as a valid fob. It wasn't mine. I contacted building management and filed a report. Security reviewed the hallway cameras beyond my door. They traced the person's path from the elevator. The cap and hoodie showed up in 3 angles. The person used a service elevator that required a master fob. That narrowed it down. Maintenance contractors rotated weekly. One name came up tied to a deactivated fob that should not have worked. The police took it from there. They pulled footage from the garage and the street. The person drove a white van with faded lettering. It matched a subcontractor used the month before. They found the van parked 2 neighborhoods away. Inside were gloves, a small flashlight, and copies of key fobs wrapped in foil. The man admitted he had followed residents, learned schedules, and used access during the day when people slept or worked. He said he liked quiet apartments. He said he stayed because he wanted to watch. I learned later that he had hidden in my closet the first time, crouched behind hanging clothes, breathing slow, waiting for the room to go dark again. The pressure I felt wasn't imagined. He had been there when I turned on the light, holding his breath until I left the room. The building changed its systems. Locks were replaced. Fobs were reissued. Cameras were added inside elevators. I moved out within a week. I couldn't stand the thought of daylight sleep anymore. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing that door open at 11:09 a.m., calm and careful. Living alone in a high-rise had felt safe because of numbers and rules. What I learned was simpler. Safety depends on noticing. I had slept through someone else's time in my life, measured in hours, measured by my breathing while they listened. The cabin was booked for November because it was cheap and empty. The listing didn't show a location beyond a vague region name, just a map pin dropped into a stretch of forest with no nearby roads labeled. In 2003, that didn't feel strange. You printed directions, followed them, and trusted you'd end up where you were supposed to be. We did. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then to dirt, then to a pair of tire tracks pressed into frozen mud. The trees closed in and stayed that way for miles. 4 of us unloaded before sunset. The air had that sharp, cold smell that settles in once fall gives up. The cabin sat alone in a small clearing. No other buildings. No visible power lines. A propane tank stood half-buried near the back wall. There was a woodpile under a tin roof and an old metal fire ring out front. Felt unused but not abandoned. The door opened clean. The lock worked. Inside smelled like dust, old wood, and mouse droppings cleaned up weeks earlier. By nightfall, one of us was sick, pale, sweating, bent over the sink. They decided to drive back to town, and the other 2 went with them. I didn't want to waste the money or the time. I said I'd stay. I was tired from the drive and wanted quiet. They left before midnight, taillights bouncing away through the trees until the forest swallowed them. I locked the door after they were gone. The cabin felt larger without the noise. The stove ticked as it cooled. The wind moved the trees with a dry rubbing sound. I lit the oil lamps and kept the fire low. I sat at the small table and read until my eyes burned. Something brushed the outside wall around 1 in the morning. It sounded like clothing dragging against rough wood. I paused and listened. The sound moved, slow and steady, circling. I stood and leaned close to the wall. The boards carried vibration more than sound. Whatever it was stayed close to the ground at first. I imagined a deer rubbing antlers or a bear nosing around for scraps. I put another log on the fire and waited. The sound came again, closer to the front windows. I could hear breathing through the wall. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. It was heavy, controlled, the way someone breathes when they are trying not to be heard. The idea that it could be a person settled in and stayed. I moved the lamp toward the window and lifted the curtain a few inches. The glass reflected the room back at me. Outside was black. I couldn't see anything at ground level. The breathing stopped. The silence pressed in, thick and watchful. Minutes passed. My shoulders tightened. The fire cracked once and then settled. I lowered the lamp and stepped back. The sound returned at the sidewall, then at the back. It traced the shape of the cabin. Each pass took longer, as if whoever was out there was measuring distance. I heard a faint scrape higher up near the window frame. The breathing came from above the sill, close enough that moisture fogged the cold glass for a second before fading. I didn't look that time. I backed away and took the rifle from the wall rack. It belonged to the owner and had been left there unloaded. I checked it and found a box of shells under the sink. My hands shook as I loaded it. The sound of metal on metal felt too loud. Something shifted near the front window. The shape rose into view, tall and narrow, blocking a slice of starlight. It wasn't smooth or animal. It had angles. It stood upright for a moment, then leaned in close to the glass. I could hear breathing through the wood again, now level with my head. The glass didn't rattle. There was no pounding, just presence. I stepped back until my shoulders touched the wall. I kept the rifle pointed low, not wanting to fire through glass into darkness. The figure moved away. Footsteps pressed into frozen leaves. They circled again, slower than before. At one point, I heard hands slide along the logs, fingers dragging across the chinking between boards. The sound climbed. Something shifted weight above me. The roof creaked, not the wind. A dull, loaded sound like someone crawling. I stood in the center of the room, eyes fixed upward, listening to boots find purchase on frost. The breathing was right above my head now, muffled by wood and insulation. I could picture a body stretched flat, chest pressed to shingles, face near the edge, listening back. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the table until the dark thinned. The sounds came and went. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes the breathing returned, close enough to feel. Once I heard a soft thud near the back door, like someone dropping down to the ground. The lock held. The door didn't move. When dawn came, it came all at once. Gray light seeped through the windows and turned the room flat and cold. The sounds stopped. The forest woke. Birds started up like nothing had happened. I opened the door with the rifle in my hands and stepped out. The ground around the cabin was scuffed with tracks that didn't match deer or bear. Boot prints, narrow and worn, circled the building. They came close to the windows and back again. At the back wall, the prints ended where someone had climbed. The ladder leaned there hadn't been moved, but the wood showed fresh scrape marks. I walked around to the front and looked up. The roof held a thin layer of frost that the sun hadn't touched yet. Near the edge above the window were handprints pressed into it, clear and deep. 5 fingers, palm heel, both hands, spaced shoulder width apart, as if someone had hauled themselves up and paused. The frost around them was cracked and smeared where weight shifted. I packed fast. I didn't clean. I didn't linger. I drove out the way we came, tires slipping in the mud until I hit gravel. In town, I returned the key to a drop box and left a note about the damage. I never asked what owned the land around that cabin. Later, through records and a local paper, I learned enough. The property backed onto a long strip of private timber leased to a hunting club. A caretaker lived out there seasonally, off the books, paid to watch for trespassers. He used the cabin area as a lookout when hunters were due, checking plates, memorizing schedules. He liked to see who stayed. He had been warned before. Knowing that didn't soften the memory. It explained the boots, the control, the choice to watch instead of break in. It explained the breathing through the walls and the hands on the roof. It made the night worse, not better. The fear had been earned, and it had been deliberate. I was 16 the summer my parents went on a 2-week business trip overseas. My sister had just started college and wasn't around, so the house was mine alone. I had stayed home plenty of times before. I thought I knew what it felt like to be alone. The house had been quiet during other summers, empty for hours while my parents worked or ran errands. I assumed the noises I remembered, pipes, the fridge humming, the old wood settling, were the limit of what a house could do when no one was in it. I was wrong. The house sat on a quiet street in a small town where few cars passed after 8 p.m. Trees lined the sidewalks and pressed in close to the windows. Summer humidity made the air thick and heavy. In the early evening, the house seemed warm and comfortable. The sunlight glinted off the windows. The living room smelled faintly of old carpet and the coffee my mother had brewed that morning, and the kitchen light cast a glow over the counters. I spent the day doing small chores, straightening the rooms my parents usually kept spotless, putting away dishes and folding laundry. The first night passed normally. I stayed up late watching videos on my laptop and snacking quietly so as not to disturb the silence. By 10, I decided to shower. The bathroom was at the end of a narrow hallway, my bedroom the last door on the left. I had just stepped under the water when I noticed the faintest sound behind the tile walls. It was soft, a long creak followed by the mattress dipping under weight. At first, I froze, thinking it was the house settling. But then the sound repeated, heavier this time, deliberate. I stayed still under the water, heart pounding, listening. The bed had moved. Someone had sat down on it. I could hear springs shift under pressure. I tried to tell myself it was impossible, that I was imagining it. I told myself no one could have gotten in, the front door was locked, the back door was double-bolted, the windows secured. But the sound was real, undeniable. When I finally turned off the water, I left the shower running a few extra minutes just to fill the bathroom with white steam and mask the silence. I wrapped myself in a towel and moved cautiously down the hall. The air felt cooler than usual, almost heavy. My bedroom door was open, but I hadn't left it that way. The bed looked different. The blanket was pulled back slightly, folded inward as if someone had stood abruptly. The pillow leaned at an angle, pressed down where a head might have rested. Then I noticed the window. It was open a few inches, though I had never touched it since the screen was torn and bent. The broken screen had always stopped me from opening it, afraid of letting bugs in or falling through if I leaned. Now the gap stared back at me, small but deliberate, letting the night air creep into the room. I pressed my hand against the window frame. It was cold, damp, and scratched in places I had never seen before. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in the living room, lights on, doors locked. Every sound, the refrigerator hum, the creak of the floors, the wind brushing against the siding, was sharper than usual, amplified by fear. I lay awake counting seconds, listening for steps, for shifts in air, for the telltale weight of a body moving on my bed. The night stretched endlessly. Morning came slow, sunlight seeping through the blinds in thin lines. The house looked the same as it always did, normal and inert. I walked through the rooms, checking windows and doors again. That was when I found the scratches. Deep grooves carved into the outside of the bedroom window frame. They were too long and jagged to be accidental, running vertical and angled as if someone had forced themselves in and then stopped. They were unmistakable, etched into the wood by something sharp and determined. It made sense later, pieced together in a way that removed fear but didn't remove the memory. A man had been arrested that week in a neighboring street. A stranger who had been casing houses in the area, entering when teens were home alone, moving carefully to avoid detection. He had known to watch routines, to test windows quietly, to sit briefly on beds to gauge whether someone was present. The scratches matched the tool he carried, a thin, hard metal wedge used to open frames without shattering glass. He had been in my room while I showered. He had used the open window to check inside and hadn't realized the door was locked behind him. The marks on the mattress, the bed pulled back, the pillow compressed. All of it was him moving with care, stopping abruptly when the water ran and leaving as silently as he could. The window remained slightly open because he had pushed it and left it that way without thinking. He was never inside long enough to take anything. The evidence was small, subtle, but unmistakable. After that, my parents changed locks and reinforced the windows. I stayed with friends for the rest of the summer, unwilling to sleep alone there again. Every noise, every shift of air, every creak of old wood reminded me of that night. The fear didn't come from ghosts or monsters. It came from someone real, deliberate, and careful, moving through my space while I was oblivious. Years later, I can still feel the memory of the bed dipping beneath weight that shouldn't have been there. I can still remember the cold air from that small gap in the window. I remember staring at the scratches in the frame and the knowledge that someone had been inside, close enough to touch, quiet enough to vanish before I could see him. The house never changed. The reality never faded. It taught me the weight of presence, the difference between empty walls and an unseen human being. I never underestimated a quiet house again. I had just moved into the apartment on the third floor of a building that felt older than it probably was. The hallways smelled faintly of damp paint and worn carpet, the kind that never quite went away no matter how often you cleaned. I was 24, freshly out of college, and had taken the place because it was cheap and close to work. I liked that it was quiet, mostly empty apartments on my floor, and the kind of silence that wasn't exactly peaceful, but the absence of noise felt like my own territory. The first few nights were normal. I would cook something small, watch a show, and fall asleep with the city hum outside my window. My bedroom was modest, just a bed, a desk, and a small bookshelf I hadn't filled yet. I kept the door locked at night because it felt natural. I liked the small barrier between me and the world outside, even if it was just a corridor. It started subtly with the small things. I would throw out trash after cooking and notice a wrapper that wasn't mine, a half-eaten granola bar, or a crushed chip bag. At first, I thought I'd left it there myself and forgotten, a result of being tired or distracted. I began to pay attention, making a mental note to check before taking the bag out. One morning, I found the wrapper again, folded neatly on top of the trash. It was subtle, almost polite, but it unsettled me. I double-checked my routine, convinced I was imagining things. A week passed. One night, I went to bed around midnight after doing dishes. The apartment was completely silent. I had a single lamp on near the desk, casting long shadows across the walls. My phone buzzed once, a text from my sister, then nothing. I fell asleep easily. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a soft creak from the hallway. My heart jumped. The building groaned sometimes, pipes settling, floors stretching. It wasn't unusual, but this creak sounded deliberate. I listened. There was nothing, then a soft scrape near the entrance to my apartment, almost like a foot dragging lightly across the floor. I froze. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to sleep. Then I heard it again, closer this time, and it stopped right outside my door. I didn't dare move. My mind raced through possibilities. Burglars, maintenance, some late-night neighbor. None of it made sense. I hadn't heard anyone in the hall in days. By the fourth night, I was on edge. I started keeping my bedroom door locked and propped a chair against it. I arranged my furniture so nothing could get through easily. That night, around 4 a.m., there was a push against the door. Not a gentle one, hard enough to shift the chair an inch. I could hear the wood scraping against the floor. I froze completely, every nerve taut. I didn't move until morning, when the chair was back exactly where I had placed it. No scratches, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been inside. I started noticing other things. Small movements out of the corner of my eye, shadows that didn't belong, the faint scent of something metallic in the air when I returned from work. I never saw anyone, never heard anyone enter, but the apartment didn't feel empty anymore. I began checking every lock, every window, every angle of the room before sleeping. I learned the building sounds, the normal groans, the pipes, the occasional floorboard creak, trying to separate them from the anomalies. But the anomalies kept happening. One evening, I stayed up, determined to catch whatever it was. I had my laptop in the living room, watching a show on mute, and I kept my eyes on the hallway. Hours passed, nothing. I felt my eyelids droop, and I nearly gave in. Then, a shadow moved at the far end of the hallway. Slow, deliberate, careful. My heart jumped into my throat. I watched as it approached the door. I didn't move. The shadow paused, then receded, leaving the hallway empty again. It wasn't fast, it wasn't chaotic, it was calculated. I realized then that it wasn't random. Someone was observing me, maybe from another apartment, maybe from somewhere in the building I hadn't noticed. The thought made my stomach turn. I installed extra locks and even a small alarm system, but nothing stopped the sense of being watched. I started taking long showers in shifts, leaving lights on in every room, moving around the apartment constantly. It came to a head one night, a Friday, when I got home late from work. I unlocked the door and immediately noticed a smell. Something burned slightly, acrid but faint, like incense mixed with metal. I froze in the hallway. The living room looked normal at first glance, but the rug was shifted slightly, and the front door had a small scratch on the frame I hadn't seen before. My blood ran cold. I spent hours inspecting the apartment, noting everything. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was broken except the scratch on the door. It was subtle, like someone had tested it, seen if it moved. I began to understand that whatever was happening wasn't about theft. It was about presence, observation, intrusion. The thought of someone moving through my home without taking anything or making obvious noise was terrifying. It made the walls feel closer, the apartment smaller, my own movements exposed. The next morning, I left a small trail of flour along the hallway, an instinctive test. When I returned that evening, the trail was disturbed, confirmed what I had feared. Someone had been inside while I was away. I called the police, and they told me it was likely a squatter scenario or someone using another apartment to access mine. They offered to patrol, but could do little without evidence. I stayed in the apartment another week, taking shifts sleeping in the living room with the door locked and the chain latch secured. Each night, I heard the faintest sounds, scrapes, soft thuds, the careful movement of someone avoiding obvious detection. Then, one night, I noticed a pattern. Each time I left the door slightly ajar to test, the intruder would enter within a precise 20-minute window. I realized they weren't random. They were timing me, learning me, waiting for the right moment. It all ended when I finally installed a security camera at the entrance of my door. Within 2 nights, I recorded a figure slipping into the apartment while I was in the kitchen, careful, silent, deliberate. The person had a hood over their head, small gloves, and moved with the familiarity of someone who had been there before. I handed the footage to the police. They traced the figure to an abandoned unit in the building, a former tenant who had been hiding and watching other residents, waiting for moments when they were alone. After that, I moved out immediately. The apartment was cheap, close to work, but the cost of my peace of mind was too high. Looking back, it wasn't a monster or anything supernatural. It was a person, methodical and patient, and it made the ordinary, familiar world of my apartment feel terrifying. The small details, the wrapper, the moved chair, the subtle noises, were all signs, small but insistent, that someone else was there. I learned to trust silence in a new way, to notice the patterns in my environment, and to never underestimate the patience of someone who observes from the shadows. I still think about that apartment. I still check locks obsessively. I still notice the little things in new places, the slight shifts in objects, the faint smells, the shadows in corners. But I don't live alone anymore. I don't want to, because even the smallest intrusions, even the subtlest presence, can change how safe a home feels forever. I had been living alone in the small apartment for almost 2 months. It was a one-bedroom unit on the top floor of an aging building, the kind where the floors creak and the pipes groan at night, making every ordinary sound feel slightly off. That night, I had finished work late and came home to an empty apartment, the quiet pressing in immediately as I unlocked the door. I carried my bag inside, set it on the counter, and flicked on the kitchen light. The overhead bulb hummed faintly, casting uneven shadows across the walls, and the silence felt unusually heavy. I made a small dinner, keeping it simple, a sandwich and a cup of tea, and sat at the table, letting the day drain out of me. After eating, I washed the dishes and set them on the counter to dry, the metallic clink of plates loud against the quiet. I settled into the living room, turned on a low-volume show, and tried to relax. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each movement marking the passing minutes. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, making the apartment feel smaller, more contained. I glanced around, noticing how the shadows from the lamp pooled in corners, shifting with the slight movements of the ceiling fan. Everything was normal. Nothing in the apartment had changed, yet the quiet seemed heavier than usual. Around 10:30, I decided to shower. I locked the bathroom door and turned on the water, the sound filling the small room. The warmth should have been comforting, but my ears kept picking up tiny noises, soft taps, distant thumps, the kind of faint sounds that seemed almost deliberate. I told myself it was the building settling, the wind, or some other harmless cause. I rinsed my hair and stepped out, wrapping myself in a towel, only to freeze for a moment when I heard a low creak from the living room. My heart skipped. The noise was slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight on the floor. I stayed perfectly still, listening. There was nothing more for a few seconds, just the hum of the water heater and the faint vibration of the radiator. Then, another sound, a soft scrape across the floor, like a chair being nudged. I could feel my chest tighten, a cold awareness settling over me. I knew I was alone. I had checked the locks, I had the chain on the door, and yet something in the rhythm of those noises suggested movement, presence. I moved cautiously to the bathroom door and opened it a crack. The living room was empty, shadows undisturbed except for the slight angle of the rug near the couch. I hadn't touched it that day. I went back to the kitchen and picked up my phone, the small screen casting a pale light over my face. I considered calling someone, anyone, but the fear was immediate and paralyzing. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been moving through the apartment while I was distracted, careful, testing me, waiting. I closed the curtains and checked every window, running my hands over the locks, listening for the faintest echo that would suggest something, or someone, was there. Everything was still. I decided to stay in the living room for the rest of the night. I moved the sofa to block the path to the bedroom door, took a knife from the kitchen, and sat rigidly listening. Hours passed slowly. Every small sound, the refrigerator humming, the pipes groaning, the wind against the windows, felt loaded, significant. I became aware of every creak in the floor, every subtle shift in the apartment's temperature or airflow. My mind traced patterns, trying to distinguish what was normal from what wasn't. Each time I thought I had it under control, a new sound would cut through. A soft thump, a subtle scrape, a shadow shifting at the edge of my vision. By 2 in the morning, exhaustion was clawing at me. I forced myself to stay alert, convinced that if I relaxed for even a moment, I would wake to find someone standing in the apartment. The hours stretched endlessly. I paced, I inspected every corner, I checked the locks repeatedly. The sense of being watched never lifted. I became aware of the small details I had ignored before. The slight tilt of the painting on the wall, a drawer slightly ajar though I had closed it, the faint smudge on the countertop that hadn't been there earlier. It was meticulous, careful. Whoever or whatever was behind it had patience and attention to detail. Around 4 in the morning, I noticed a subtle pattern in the sounds, a rhythm that suggested more than coincidence. Scrapes and thumps came at regular intervals, sometimes from the kitchen, sometimes from the hallway. I realized that someone had been in the apartment before, observing, waiting for times when I was alone, and the noises were tests, signals, movements to check the environment and my reactions. Fear turned into cold, methodical thinking. I planned. I would catch the intruder, or at least confirm my suspicions. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera app, and left it recording in the hallway. I didn't move for hours, my eyes trained on the screen. The wind rattled the windows, and the building settled as it always did. But then, a shadow flickered past the corner of the camera. I froze, watching the subtle movement as the figure, small, careful, gloved hands, tested a lock near the kitchen. It didn't move quickly, didn't make a sound that I could hear from my position, but the recording confirmed what I had feared. Someone had been in my apartment, observing, waiting, moving without purpose other than presence. When dawn broke, I left immediately. I called the police and showed them the footage. They traced the figure to another unit in the building, abandoned but accessible through maintenance passages. I never returned to that apartment. The silence, the shadows, the subtle noises that had felt like tests stayed with me for weeks afterward. I realized that home, no matter how familiar or secure it seemed, could be invaded in ways that left no traces, only a sense of being watched. Even now, in a new apartment, I double-check locks obsessively. I avoid leaving doors slightly open, and I notice the small movements that most people ignore. The experience changed how I perceive quiet, how I experience being alone at night. There was no monster, no supernatural force, only a human presence, patient, careful, observing. But that knowledge made the apartment, the night, and even the ordinary hum of the building feel dangerous in a way I had never imagined. I never felt truly alone again. I moved into the house because it was empty and cheap and close to my work. That was the entire reason. I was 32, recently separated, tired of noise, tired of shared walls. The place sat at the edge of a quiet street where the houses thinned out and the trees grew closer together. It had been vacant for over a year. The paint was dull. The lawn was uneven. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and old wood. It felt neutral, like a place that had already forgotten the people who lived there before me. The first weeks were calm. I worked long hours and came home after dark. I cooked simple meals. I slept early. The silence felt clean. At night, the house made normal sounds. Pipes clicked, wood settled, wind brushed the siding. None of it bothered me. I grew used to the shape of the rooms and the way the hallway light spilled across the floor. I learned which steps creaked and which didn't. I started to feel alone in a way that was comforting. The first strange thing was small. I noticed the front door was unlocked when I came home one evening. I was sure I locked it that morning. I always locked it. I stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, listening. The house was still. Nothing was out of place. I told myself I had rushed that morning. I locked it and moved on. A few days later, I found the kitchen window unlatched. I rarely opened it because it faced the side yard where the bushes grew close to the wall. I remembered washing dishes the night before, standing at the sink, looking out at the dark glass. I remembered the latch clicking shut. Still, I closed it again and checked the rest of the windows. Everything else was secure. After that, I started checking things without thinking about it. Locks, windows, the back door. Felt like habit, not fear. The house still felt empty when I was inside it. I never heard footsteps. I never smelled anything strange. I never saw lights on where they shouldn't be. The first thing that truly unsettled me happened late one night. I woke up around 3, needing water. The house was dark and quiet. I walked into the kitchen and saw a cabinet door open. It was the one under the sink. I never used it. Cleaning supplies sat inside, untouched since I moved in. I stood there staring at it, feeling cold spread across my arms. I closed it and stood still, listening. Nothing followed. I went back to bed and lay awake until morning. The next day, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the hinge was loose. Maybe I opened it without thinking earlier that evening. Still, I bought a small notebook and started writing things down. Dates, times, what I noticed. Felt silly, but it grounded me. Over the next week, the notes grew longer. A chair in the living room shifted slightly from how I left it. The bathroom light off when I was sure I left it on. Footprints in the dust near the back door that didn't match my shoes. Each thing alone was easy to dismiss. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I stopped inviting anyone over. I didn't want other people disturbing the house and confusing my sense of it. I wanted control over every detail. I cleaned more than usual. I vacuumed corners. I wiped shelves. I kept everything where I could remember it. At night, sleep came harder. I lay still, listening to the house breathe. Every sound felt sharper. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind pressing against the siding. Sometimes I thought I heard movement, but when I focused, it faded into nothing specific. One evening, I came home early and found the back door locked from the inside. I stood on the small concrete step, staring at the handle. My key worked on that door too, but the deadbolt could only be turned by hand. I walked around to the front, heart pounding, scanning the yard. Nothing moved. I unlocked the front door and went inside slowly, checking every room. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. The house felt empty, but the air felt different, heavy, like it had been used. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the bedroom with the lights off, watching the hallway. Around 4 in the morning, I heard a sound that wasn't part of the house settling. It was soft and deliberate, pressure against wood. The faint scrape of weight shifting came from below, near the basement door at the end of the hall. I stayed still, breathing shallow, listening. The sound stopped. Minutes passed. Nothing else happened. When the sun came up, I opened the basement door. The steps led down into darkness and smelled damp and old. At the bottom, near the wall, I saw flattened dust where something had been moved recently. The storage shelves were disturbed. A blanket I didn't own lay folded behind them. That was when the fear became clear and solid. Someone had been inside the house. Someone had been there long enough to settle in, to move quietly, to learn my habits. I left immediately and spent the day away. I called the landlord and told him everything. He sounded uneasy but not surprised. He said the previous tenant had complained about missing food and strange noises. He said he thought it was stress. He said he would come by the next day. That night, I didn't return home. I slept in my car in a grocery store parking lot, waking at every sound. In the morning, I drove back with the landlord. We walked through the house together. He opened the basement again and found more signs. Food wrappers hidden behind boxes. A mattress dragged into a crawl space. Bottles filled with water. Someone had been living there quietly, carefully, avoiding detection. The police were called. They searched the property and the surrounding woods. They found nothing that day. No person, no trail, just evidence of someone who knew how to stay unseen. I moved out that week. I didn't argue about the lease. I didn't pack slowly. I took what I needed and left the rest behind. The last time I walked through the house, it felt hollow in a way it never had before, like it was holding its breath. Months later, I learned they caught someone nearby, living in abandoned buildings, slipping into empty homes at night. He admitted to staying in the basement for weeks, leaving when he heard movement above, returning when the house went quiet. He chose places where one person lived alone. He watched patterns. He avoided confrontation, knowing that didn't bring relief. It confirmed every moment of unease, every instinct I tried to ignore. I still live alone now, but I don't enjoy silence the same way. I lock doors, then check them again. I notice small changes. I trust discomfort when it appears. The house I live in now feels occupied, even when I am the only one inside, and that feeling, grounded and aware, keeps me safe.